Hello and welcome back to the Worship Team Podcast. My name is Alex Infiegin. I'm your host. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Hey, I don't know about you, but I want to be a more effective person. If I can multiply my time, my energy, my impact in this world, I want to know how. And that's what we're going to be talking about today is multiplying your ministry. How to go from just you to multiple people accomplishing your mission through you. I had a great chance to catch up with my good friend Justin Bell, who is a worship pastor and pastor of many sorts of things at Calvary Nexus in Camarillo, California. Justin has done an incredible job at multiplying his ministry. It started out with just him and 3 teams, and now it is a huge ministry. I don't even know how many people are involved, but there are 12 teams and 15 or 16 worship leaders who are all equipped to do a fantastic job. So he doesn't have to do everything himself. So if you want to learn how to multiply your effectiveness and multiply your ministry, this episode is for you. Now, I'll be honest up front, it's more geared towards worship leaders or worship directors. But if you're a team member, you can still take a lot of the principles found here and apply them to your personal life or even your role as a team member on your team. I would say listen to it, enjoy it, and be blessed by it. I did have some audio issues with my microphone. I apologize. I don't want you to miss the good content in this. Thankfully, Justin does most of the talking, so you don't have to put up with my annoying microphone issues too much. But enjoy the podcast, be blessed, and I'll catch you at the back end. Enjoy my interview with Justin Bell. I am here with Justin Bell, a good friend of mine. Justin and I met many years ago when we were teenagers. And Justin is we'll call him the worship pastor at Calvary Nexus, but really he's the administrative / executive pastor / does like everything. He oversees all of the worship ministry at Calvary Nexus, which is in Camarillo, California. He preaches, he oversees the deacons and the elders and all the admin stuff. He's a man of many talents, but he's exceedingly good at multiplying his ministries. His music team and the culture they've created there is all about multiplication, many leaders, shared leadership, equipping others to do the ministry well. So I'm honored to be here with my friend Justin. So hello, Justin.
Hello, it's good to be with you.
Yeah, man, I'm excited. Okay, so I want to start by having you tell us a little bit about what your music ministry was like when you came to Calvary Nexus 10 years ago as a 19-year-old. Give us a little bit of insight where you were when you started 10 years ago and how you've seen God multiply your ministry 10 years into your journey there.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so like you said, Alex, I started about 10 years ago, came on staff at our church here at Calvary Nexus. And at the time, I was just an intern helping out with youth ministry and some of the music ministry within the youth ministry. And after being into it for about a year and a half, and I had just turned 19, the worship pastor at the time was leaving his position, and then our lead pastor, Pastor Bruce Zachary, he turned to me and said, "Would you like to become the worship director?" And honestly, I was super overwhelmed at even the thought of doing this at a growing church. I think at that time we were running about 400 people on a typical Sunday service. But I just, it was something that I had always been very passionate about, always loved, playing music. And so I accepted the position. We've always kind of had a culture at Calvary Nexus of having multiple worship leaders. It's instead of just, there's just one guy who's doing every single service. We would have other people who were worship leaders that were leading at a specific service. And when I first took over, there were three other teams that were doing Sunday mornings and our Wednesday evening service. So in a typical month, I was leading worship one Sunday a month and maybe 2 or 3 Wednesdays a month as the worship director. And just over the years, the church has grown. About 4 years ago, we went multi-site. We started a second campus. So now at this point, in any given week, we're doing 5 different Sunday services that need 3 different worship teams, and we're doing a midweek Wednesday night service that needs another worship team. So this has just continue to multiply, and it's something, like I said, I kind of inherited this culture, but it's become something that I think could be helpful for worship leaders and worship pastors and directors to consider a model of raising up multiple leaders so that they're not just plugging away doing it every single Sunday.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what you're saying is, as your church grew, your need for more worship leaders and worship teams grew. So you started with 3 teams when you came, and now how many teams do you guys have, and how many leaders do you guys have?
Yeah, at this point, it's kind of funny. Sometimes I lose track, but at this point, I think we have about 12 worship teams, and we have a couple more worship leaders on top of that are kind of on standby for when we have a hole in the schedule. So we probably have about 15 worship leaders altogether that are ready to go and jump in whenever we need them to lead.
Wow. So you've got, in 10 years, you went from 3 worship leaders and teams to 12 teams and maybe 15 worship leaders, all of whom, which over the last 10 years, you've equipped to be excellent at what they do. And you've trained them and challenged them and helped them grow to be excellent worship leaders. And that's exciting to see the multiplication aspect of your faithfulness over the last 10 years. So I want to ask you to tell our listeners why you think multiplication is important. Why does it matter that we as worship leaders aren't just solo acts, but we're pouring into other people to multiply our ministry?
Yeah, absolutely, Alex. I mean, first of all, I think at the core of it is that multiplication is biblical. I mean, you see, as you study the life of Jesus, we all know that a focus and aspect of his ministry is pouring into these 12 guys that are, going to, basically start the church. And we just see his example that he doesn't do it all himself, but he pours into others so that they can continue. And, Jesus says, you're going to do even greater things in my name. And I think that that's really the mark of a good leader is not necessarily how things look while he's there and while he or she is doing their ministry, but what that looks like, what their legacy looks like, and what other leaders they're raising up, and really what the ministry looks like once they've left or once God has moved them on to another place. That's really the test of someone's faithfulness, I believe. And when it comes to being a worship leader, I think that beyond the fact that I believe that it's biblical to raise up leaders, it's incredibly practical, and it's something that can be very helpful. We've all as worship leaders experienced worship leader burnout, where we're going through the motions. It's Sundays always come in, and we've got to put together one more set, and creating a depth of leadership can really help with that. Like for us, for example, most of our worship leaders are leading one time a month. So they have a whole month to be getting refreshed, to be praying about their set that they want to do, their musicians that they're using. They're just chomping at the bit to get back up there and to begin leading again. And it's kind of one of those things where a lot of times we feel so busy, like I don't have time to pour into a leader, but really you don't have time not to raise up leaders, because you're going to end up getting burned out. And if you have to go somewhere, you don't want to leave your church in a place where you're totally messed up. I mean, I always like to say, if I got hit by a bus today, our church would be completely fine, because we
Oh my
have
gosh.
so many great worship leaders. I mean, so yeah.
That's awesome. I love what you said about the mark of a great leader is what legacy they leave when they're gone. Like, did they pour into others? Did they equip others? Did they multiply and pour into more leaders? And how will the organization be if you got hit by a bus? And I think that's fair for all of the worship leaders listening to ask, like, how am I doing in this? Am I the lone star, or will the church, obviously the church will go on without you, but will you leave them in a lurch if and when you leave? And I think of something that Carey Nieuwhof, a great blogger and pastor, says. He says that the leader who raises up other leaders who can lead well or better than they can isn't less valuable to the organization, but more valuable. Like, because I think a lot of times we're like, it's an ego thing. We're like, I need to be on the stage because I'm the best at this, or I need to be, in charge because if someone else is, then it's going to not be as great as if I was up there. So, but that's an ego trip, and you're actually limiting your organization, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it takes great humility, to come to a place where you're going to raise up other people, and really knowing that, you know what, some of these people that I'm raising up might become a lot better than I am even.
Yeah.
And it is a humbling thought, and there is that ego that goes there. But I mean, we all know as worship leaders, it's not about us, right? It's about Jesus. So we want to be raising up other people, and part of raising them up is knowing that it's going to be a process. When we, once again, going back to the Gospels, when you and I look at the disciples, at the the end of Jesus's ministry, you look at these guys and you think, oh my gosh, I don't think I would trust them to start the Church of Jesus Christ, but Jesus does, and as they're filled with the Holy Spirit, they do just fine. And I think that that's really what it takes. Is that some worship leaders have this fear, like they think, I've got this certain level when I lead worship, and if I let someone else have the stage, the level's going to drop, and then what if people leave? And we start worrying about all this stuff. But you just got to let someone start to do it. I mean, think about when you and I were leading worship 10 years ago. I mean,
Bad.
and it was really bad. And for some reason, people kept coming. It's probably because of the teaching.
Yeah.
But we needed to keep doing it to be able to grow ourselves. So we need to have that same mentality.
Yeah, and it increases your kingdom effectiveness, because I and you can only do so much. But if you equip 30 other people in your lifetime to do better than you, you've advanced the kingdom 30 times more than you could have done if you just sat on your gift and were greedy about it. So I love that, man. That's exciting to me, what you're doing. And it's kind of really my heart too, is I kind of had this epiphany. I'm going to be 30 in the summer this year. And 2 years ago, I was thinking about that. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm almost 30. Where do I want to be when I'm 40? Well, I don't want to be like just some fat, balding 40-year-old worship leader, who's never done anything except for lead worship on Sundays. Like, I would rather start raising up an army and equipping an army of other worship leaders who are younger, better, cooler, more effective than I am,
Right.
And start training them. It kind of like, I don't know if you know Bob Coughlin, who wrote Worship
Yeah.
Matters, but I mean, he's basically empowered and launched countless others into really effective ministry. And I'm like, I want to be like that,
Yeah, absolutely.
So, which is why we're doing this podcast, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, any other thoughts on like why multiplication is important? You said burnout, it helps with burnout, it's biblical. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the other thing is that it can create a variety and a freshness, for the church. I mean, we've all, I think, experienced when we have like one worship leader that we're really into, and you have you have the time where you're constantly listening to their CDs in your car, but then you kind of get to a point a couple years into it where you're not as into that worship leader anymore. Or we've done that with with pastors and teachers as well. You know, you get into one pastor and you listen to him over and over and over again, and then you kind of know what he's going to say. And I think that when you have a team of worship leaders, you create a certain aspect of freshness. And with that, you can have a double-edged sword that, you know, I'd like to talk about a little bit later, with being able to create consistency in a church where you have a culture of multiplication. But I think that, you know, the positive side of that is that you create that variety and that freshness for the local church.
That is so true, because honestly, like, if I lead a whole bunch of weeks in a row, I can tell people are ready for a change.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you get someone who gets up there and leads way different than I do, and it's like super refreshing for the church. They're like,
Yeah.
and that person, the way that that person leads meets the needs of other people in the church that I don't meet, you know?
Yeah.
So that's good. Anything else?
We just, I mean, we have all different ages, all different, you know, types of people. And what I've noticed is that it's nice to have different worship leaders, because these different worship leaders will minister to these different groups in different ways. And we try to create a culture of being contemporary, because that's just what we feel like God's called us to do at Calvary Nexus. But we do insert a hymn into each one of our sets, because we realize that there is that 80-year-old in the service that that'll bless them to be able to hear the hymn, and, you know, also the 20-year-old, it's, you know, they need to hear that, and it's good to learn that theology of that song and so forth. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that having different worship leaders really ministers to different people in the church. I love talking to different people in our church, and, you know, seeing what worship leaders really minister to them, and it's always different depending on the person. So
That's awesome. So that's kind of the why multiplication is important. Now, tell us a little bit about how you at your church at Calvary Next, you've multiplied your ministry. So you came when there was only 3 teams, and 10 years in, there's 12 teams and 15 worship leaders. Tell us how your process. How? Like, let's say someone's listening and they're like, okay, I want to do this. I have no idea where to start. I've always just led myself. It's been a solo act. How do I do this? So give us some insight into that.
yeah, absolutely. The way that I like to look at it is kind of like you're creating a farming system, if you would. You know, a lot of times the only thing that we're thinking about is sanctuary worship. But if you want to be able to create this sort of culture within your church, you have to look a lot further and a lot more beyond. You have to ask yourself, do people have an opportunity to grow and to use their gifts in our church? Or is it only, hey, once you're good enough to play on Sunday morning, then come talk to me? Do they have opportunities to be able to grow?
And you're talking about different avenues or venues for people to gain experience. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a couple of ways that you can do this. One of my favorite ways personally is youth ministry. Youth ministry is a great place for people to be growing as worship leaders, and that can be for those who are adults, can go and serve in the youth ministry, and they might not be ready to lead in your sanctuary yet, but the kids will love them, and the kids are super blessed, even in kids ministry as well. But not only adults, but actually the youth. And that's something that for a long time at Calvary Nexus, I was the junior high pastor. I transitioned out of that a little over a year ago. But that's something I'm always talking to our youth pastors about, is, you know, making sure, hey, are you guys putting kids on your team? Because that's, once again, it's easy to show up by yourself with your acoustic 5 minutes before and play your set. And sometimes when you're in youth ministry, you're so busy that that's all you seem to have time for. However, what happens to those kids in the youth group that play drums, that play electric guitar, put in the effort to raise up these kids? And a lot of the worship leaders and worship musicians that we have at our church, 5 years ago, they were in the youth group playing every Wednesday, playing every Sunday. So if you create that culture in your youth ministry and in your kids ministry, where adults and kids have opportunities to constantly be leading worship, then they're going to be prepared to be able to lead in the sanctuary for your church body.
That's so huge. That's actually how I got started in worship music ministry. My youth leader said, "Hey, you're musical. Do you think you could learn how to play the drums?" And he threw me in there. And then he was like, "Hey, do you think you can play electric? Hey, do you think you could sing? Hey, do you think you could lead?" And so thank you, Phil Eisenhower. I know you listen to this podcast. Thanks for doing that. But so many worship leaders start leading in the youth band. I don't know your story. Is that true for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I did start leading in the youth band. Mm-hmm.
So you're saying create venues for people who maybe aren't ready for the main stage, and start using those venues to give them experience. So we've done that here at Cypress ever since I had my I don't want to be a 40-year-old fat solo worship leader epiphany. I was like, okay, where can we need one, we need places for people to gain experience, and two, we need places to be able to put people when we tell them, no, you're not ready for the main stage. So here are some of my venues that we've created over the last 2 years. You tell me some more of yours. So we started a youth band, like you said, and then we have a college band. And then we started a thing called a praise chorus for singers who maybe, need some more experience or don't know how to find harmonies. So we're teaching them how to find harmonies. They sing once every 6 or 7 or 8 weeks platform with us. And then I'm working on getting the women's Bible study a female worship leader. So those are some venues that we've created that maybe some of the listeners could try to do. Now, do you have any more besides like youth ministry, or is that really like your main training ground?
Well, that is our main one, but we do have other venues as well. Like you were saying, women's ministry, when they'll have a special event, that's a good time to plug in a worship leader, or studies. Community groups, we'll send worship leaders to community groups to lead worship in those times. Men's ministry, we have a men's ministry gathering that happens at our church every Thursday evening, and I've sent some worship leaders over there to try and grow. I've got a guy on my team right now who's playing electric guitar with me, and he really wants to start leading worship, and so he's been going over there every couple weeks, and he'll lead worship for that Thursday night study. And that's another venue that we'll send worship leaders to be able to play. And then one other thing that I forgot to mention is that you can put an up and coming worship leader on your team. We've all heard it before that sometimes things are taught, but more often than not they're caught. It's by them being. You can sit down and you can tell them how to lead a worship team, but there's nothing like them being on your worship team and seeing how you prepare everything, how you lead the team, how you interact with people, how you deal with conflict, and have them on your team. And when you feel like they're ready, let them lead a song. And if that goes well, then let them lead a couple songs. And what's really important when you have somebody on your team and you're going to let them lead a song, especially a worship leader that you're raising up, give them the authority to communicate to your team what they want to do with the song. Don't step in and give them training wheels where you're coordinating, you're telling the drummer when to come in. Give the reins over to the other worship leader and let them do it, and then you can give them feedback after. If say, hey buddy, the bass player had no idea when you wanted him to come in. You're going to want to tell him that. You're going to want to communicate a clear roadmap to your team. But putting someone on your team once they're ready, that is so invaluable, because they're not leading their own team yet, but they're getting to kind of dabble in it and kind of get their feet wet. And after doing that for a little while, they're going to be ready pretty quickly to start leading their own team.
That's awesome. And I love how you said, because I kind of hold the reins tight. I'm like, I'm the music director. I got to make sure the band is tight and sounds good. But I love that challenge to myself, which is like, dude, just relax and let the kid try, or let the guy or the gal try. And I really think it's important what you said is about feedback afterwards. Because a
Yeah.
lot of times we'll be like, oh, yeah, they led the song on Sunday, and then we won't debrief with them about it and be like, okay, how do you think it went? How could you engage the congregation better? How can you, and just like pick their brain a little bit and give them feedback. I think feedback, the F word, that's a really good F word, right?
Yeah,
A really
absolutely.
important one.
Yeah, and that's something that we do as well. Is I always try to make sure that there's what I like to say. There's some sort of a worship director type that is in each of the services, so that we can provide that feedback, and we'll do it on site, and we'll also do it sometimes through email after. We also try to meet with our worship leaders at least one-on-one once a year, and then we can just kind of spend some time talking to them about. You always want to start with the areas that you think that they're doing well. You don't want to jump right into the criticism. Tell them the ways that you've seen them grow. Tell them they're really effective with, and then move on to that with sharing with them areas that they can grow. And something that I always like to tell my worship leaders when we're having that conversation is I say, hey, I'm just reminding you that the very fact that we've put you on the schedule is that we recognize that you have a gift of leading worship. So I don't want you to get it confused when I'm giving you feedback, like I think you're some terrible worship leader, because if I thought that, I'd just remove you. So I'll always tell them that, so that, because as musicians, our ego sets in, and when we hear someone tell us that a note was a little flat, then we get all extreme about it, and we go and start crying in our room and thinking that we're the worst worship leader in the world. And it can be good to kind of preempt that with sharing with them that, hey, we think you're very gifted. These are just some things that I think that you could work on. So
That's awesome. So that's another way. Are there more ways to multiply your ministry that you've utilized over the last 10 years at Calvary Nexus?
Yeah, I think an important question that you want to ask, and this is kind of more of a big picture worship ministry question, is you want to ask yourself, so if you were coming to your own church as a musician, what is the experience like, you getting involved in the worship ministry? Is this something that is a clear process? Is it something that's easy to understand? Or is it this exclusive club of musicians that it seems like you can never get in with? What is the process like of getting involved in worship ministry at your church? Is it something that is clear? Is it something that people can really understand? And what we do is the first thing that you want to look at is, what are the portals for getting connected? And for us, we have something called a Connect card that we'll give out on Sunday mornings. Everybody gets one, or they can pop it open in their app or on our website, where they can sign up for ministry, saying, I'm really interested in worship ministry. And then I'll get that information, and then I can reach out to them and I can connect with them. And then what you want to do from that point is you want to make sure that they're qualified spiritually. You want to make sure that they're a Christian, and you also want to make sure, ideally, that they're living a life generally that's above reproach. So what we'll do is we'll give them a questionnaire to fill out, and we have like 11 simple questions that kind of give me an idea of, hey, how did you get saved? How would you define worship? And asking these questions, I mean, it's not foolproof, but it certainly gives you an idea of where they're at spiritually. And our last question that I ask on there is there anything in your life that you think would disqualify you for being in church leadership? Because I view a worship leader or the worship musicians, they're all really worship leaders. I view them as being held to a 1 Timothy 3 standard, personally. I mean, These people are on the stage. People are seeing them for a third of your service. You want to make sure that they're generally living a life that's above reproach. So you make sure, number one, that they're qualified spiritually. But the second thing that you want to look at is, are they qualified musically? because they could be the godliest person in the world, but if they don't know how to sing or play well, then they might not be the best fit for your worship ministry. So you want to have a way, a clear process for how can you determine if they're gifted musically. The way that we do this is we do open auditions. And it used to be that I would just meet with somebody one-on-one, and I'll do that sometimes, but it's much more effective if you can plug them into a band. So if I got someone who's trying out for keyboards, we have a day, it's an open audition. I have a house band that's all ready. They've learned the songs, and the person jumps in on the keys, and they have to play along with the band. And then that gives us an ability to see how do they do playing with the band, using the monitors, meshing with the drummer, all that good stuff. So second thing, like I said, you want to make sure they're qualified musically. And the last one is that you want to make sure that they're qualified theologically. And what I mean by this is you want to make sure that they generally line up with the beliefs of your church. And that's not to say that there can't be minor differences. But I mean, if somebody comes to our church and they want to join the worship team and they don't believe that Jesus is God, well, that's an issue for me, because that's a major theological point. If they disagree with us about the timing of the rapture, I'll still let them on the worship team. That's more of a minor issue. The way that we do that is our pastor actually wrote a book on worship. It's called Fruitful Worship by Pastor Bruce Zachary. I'm just giving a little plug for that. And we'll have them read the Fruitful Worship book, and I'll say, hey, get back to me. Let me know what you thought about it. And we also have a question on the questionnaire. Are there any teachings of our church that you disagree with? So through your process, you want to make it simple. And you want to make sure, are they qualified spiritually, are they qualified musically, and are they qualified theologically to serve in your worship ministry?
Yeah, and I think that is just about getting musicians from the seeds into your teams. And then you start looking at the musicians that might be able to lead, and you take them through the next set of processes of, like you said earlier, hey, lead this song, hey, lead these two songs, hey, here's some feedback.
Exactly.
So there's a trail from the pews or the seats all the way up to being a worship leader. And if you listen to the podcast and you have not created that pathway, you will never be able to multiply your ministry as effectively as our friend here, Justin, has. So I think that's awesome. I want to say something about multiplying our ministries, how to do it, because right now we've been talking a lot about worship leaders, and maybe if some of the worship team members that are listening, maybe they've already tuned out. They're like, this is boring, this isn't for me. But if you're still listening, worship team member, I think there are some things that we say to you, worship team members, about multiplying yourself too, because it's easy to fall into the same trap of like prideful, I want to sing, I get to sing, or I'm the best bass player, I'm going to play as much as I can. But really, if you're a worship team member, you should be trying to multiply yourself. So if you're a bass player, go to the youth band and start training up and helping these younger bass players, giving them tips and advice, and show them how to move around the neck and how to do fills and what's tasteful and what grooves work. Or if you're a singer, start attending like the praise chorus or the choir and help some of these younger singers understand harmony and blending and parts. So I think this isn't just for worship leaders. This is for every single person in the church. How are you multiplying yourself? How are you pouring into others? How are you giving away your knowledge and your insights and your experience to advance the kingdom by passing it to people? And I think if we start doing that, and all of the members of our music teams jump on board with this multiplication mindset, it's going to have massive kingdom ripple effects through our team members and through everyone in the church.
Right, absolutely.
So do you have any other tips on how to multiply your ministry, or do you want to start talking about some of the challenges that we face when we do start to multiply ourselves?
Yeah, very, very briefly, I think what you said is gold. And that was one of the things that I forgot to mention, is that at our church, we have something called a youth center. It's called The Bridge. And this is something that junior hires and high schoolers come to after. It's basically an after-school program, and it's totally free. And one of the things that we offer is lessons. And a lot of the people that are in the worship ministry, they'll serve in this capacity, and they'll teach these junior hires and high schoolers how to play their instruments. And, when you were talking, I was thinking about one of our drummers in particular serves at the youth center a lot, and he's teaching like 2 or 3 different kids right now how to play drums. And those kids have joined the youth worship team, and they've grown, and some of them have even started to play in the sanctuary. So, yeah.
That's gold. Awesome. Okay, so we've taken our listeners through why they should multiply, how they can multiply, and now, like, just tell us in your experience, like, obviously it's not all smooth. What are some of the challenges you've faced over the last 10 years in trying to multiply yourselves?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that can be a challenge is that, as a worship leader or pastor or director, one of the things that you're wanting to do is you want to shepherd those that are in your worship ministry. When you just have your one team and you've got your guitarist, your bassist, your drummer, your backup singer, your keyboard player, that's 5 people to shepherd, and that's can be fairly manageable for most people. But when you start to expand to, now you have all sorts of worship leaders and you have all sorts of musicians, you have to number one, create depth of leadership. You have to have people that are assisting you. What we try to do is I actually localize that responsibility with each worship leader, and I charge them and just say that, hey, you're not just playing music here, or you're not just the worship leader for the service, but you're the shepherd or the shepherdess to your team to make sure that everybody's doing okay. And you really have to also trust the Lord. Because it's something that you can try to organize and administrate as much as possible, but you just have to also trust the Lord that He's going to be faithful, and He'll reveal to you when somebody may need a little bit of extra help. So that's one aspect that can be a challenge. Another one, a big one, I mentioned earlier, talking about the double-edged sword. Remember, I was mentioning that one of the benefits of having this culture of multiplication is that you have variety and freshness. The other side of that double-edged sword is that you have the potential to not have consistency in your worship services. And that can be in quality, which I'll talk about in a moment here, but it can also be in your song selection. And that was an issue that we were experiencing for a while, because the more that we started to grow, we had all these different teams that had these songs that they wanted to play. And this team had their 20 songs they like to play. This team had their 20 songs. And before you knew it, nobody knew any of the songs that we were singing on a typical Sunday. When it's just one person, one of the benefits of that is that you kind of have the holistic view of what songs are being played. A couple of the things that we've done to work with this and to try to create more consistency is, number one, we made a song pool, which I know for some worship leaders, that's just like the worst thing that you could say. Don't control me. I don't want to be controlled by some sort of song pool. But it can be helpful and it can be beneficial. And I would say that within that, for us, something that I found that works well is to have a song pool, but it's sort of loose. I know some worship ministries that they have a 20 songs in their song pool, and the worship leaders are only allowed to play those 20 songs. And I know that works great for some churches. That doesn't work for our church. So what we have is we have a song pool of more like 50 or 60 songs. And what we do is we ask the worship leaders to choose the majority of the songs from that song pool. But then we allow them to introduce one new song on top of that. But we do ask that they try to be strategic about that. What we'll do is sometimes we'll coordinate with some of the different worship leaders, say, hey, this is a really cool song that we heard lately. I'm going to do it. Why don't you pray about doing it on the Sunday after me? And we also ask the worship leaders to try to repeat that song the next time that they lead, so that they can start to create consistency. Another thing that we started to do is we keep a song history. of every song that has ever been played in the service, and I share that resource with the other worship leaders so they know when they're going in and they're planning their set, they can look back and they can see, okay, these were the songs that were done last Sunday, these were the songs the Sunday before at this particular campus, at this particular service, so that they can plan based on that, and they can realize that if they're coming in and they're bringing 5 songs that haven't even been played at that campus for 9 months, then there might be an issue with their set. So things that we try to do to create consistency. But I've created that loose model because we need to realize as worship pastors and directors that we're working with artists here. And, artists want to be able to create. And if you put an artist in too tight of a box, they can't flourish. So if you can create sort of those boundaries and organization while not getting them in this tight box where they feel like they have to make this cookie cutter worship set, then you can create that consistency.
That's awesome. Like you said, consistency and quality, that is a struggle because we're like, oh yeah, this person's still learning, so maybe it's not quite as good as if this person led or if I led. But I think, like you said in the beginning, we just have to be okay with that and trust that God is going to bless his church anyway. And I think God will bless it even more because we're making disciples, and we're obeying his command. So maybe the quality will dip a little bit on a Sunday that someone new is leading, but they'll never get better if they don't lead. So we've got to be okay with a little bit of a dip in quality, knowing that in the end, they might surpass us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and just very briefly, a couple of other challenges that you have is, as you were talking about, is the quality. And I think that a couple ways that you can really mentor your worship leaders and raise them up, and even your people on your worship teams, is, as we talked about, is to provide regular feedback to those musicians and to those worship leaders. I personally will charge the worship leader to give feedback to a bassist. It's kind of strange if all of a sudden I'm calling them up and telling them that they need to work on their bass tones or something like that. But we'll mention it to the worship leader so the worship leader can provide that feedback to the musician. And then also providing resources to those that are in your worship ministry. And this can be telling them about a conference that's coming up. It can be even, asking your senior pastor if you can have some funds to be able to pay for people in your worship ministry to be able to go to some sort of conference. If they can get away for a couple of days during the week, that's great. But there's also a lot of conferences that are Friday, Saturday. But there's these little getaways that you could do. Different resources, different books. Worship Matters, as you mentioned, is a great one. Having them listen to, like, this podcast, for example, is a great resource. And then the other thing, finally, you want to try to meet with your worship leaders. And what we do is we try to get together quarterly with all of our worship leaders. I use that time to try to get a pulse on them. The last thing that you want in your worship ministry is knowing that all of your worship leaders are super bummed out about the direction and the vision, but they don't have a forum to be able to share that with you, because then they're going to get burned out. There's going to be division in the worship ministry. So I use those times to just say, hey guys, let's be real. Why don't you share with me about the things that are frustrating you, things that you think that we could do to grow. I'll also use that time to cast vision, to try to train them, to try to encourage them. And then beyond that, try to get one-on-one with the worship leaders so we can get a little bit more intimate and detailed on some of the areas that we want to give them that feedback. I think we live in a day and age where we do a lot of email and we do a lot of texting, and I think that that's good and it's helpful. We email our worship leaders every time they lead worship. We'll email them feedback, but it can be very beneficial to get that FaceTime, and not FaceTime with your iPhone, but to sit down with them and have coffee with them and find out how they're doing and to really shepherd them. So those are some of the things that can be challenges, and those are some of the remedies to be able to create a healthy culture of multiplication in your church.
Justin, that's awesome, man. And it sounds like you're doing an excellent job. And I would love to kind of conclude this conversation by we're just saying make disciples, people, right?
Right.
Just make disciples. If we don't multiply ourselves, we are holding our church back. If you didn't multiply yourself, your church would not have been able to grow to have all the services that it had. So, don't be selfish and make disciples. And I think that's super cool. And Justin, I think people might have some questions for you after listening to this. Is there a way to get a hold of you online, like Twitter or Facebook? Where would they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. They can follow me on Twitter. My username is Justin Emery Bell. They can also always email me. My email is justin@calvarynexus.org. And they can also go to our church website, calvarynexus.org, and you should be able to find me in any way. I'd love to be of any help that I can possibly to anyone that would be interested in asking any sort of questions.
Awesome. Hey, Justin, thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience with us on this podcast. We are very blessed.
Thank you so much. It was good to be with you.
All right, well, some great stuff from Mr. Justin Bell. Thank you, Justin. Hey, again, I want to apologize for the audio issues with my microphone. I will have those sorted out by the next episode. Speaking of the next episode, it'll be in about a month, and it's going to be about what to do when a team member sins. And that's, for worship leaders and team members. How do we react as a team member or a worship leader when one of our team members falls into sin? So that should be a great episode. I'm going to have my Australian senior pastor on, so you get some good accent there. But it's just going to be a great time. Hey, if you want to interact about the episode and multiplication, or if you have questions for me or for Justin Bell, if you click in the show notes on your podcast app, there's a link that says show notes. If you click that, it'll open up to my website, and it'll go straight to the episode, and you can click to leave a comment there, and we will interact with you about that. So feel free to do that. Also, if you haven't left a rating on iTunes and you're being blessed by this podcast, please leave a rating on iTunes. That would help us get it to more people. So we are thankful for you as a listener, and I just want to encourage you to continue to press on, multiply, make disciples, and lead your church well, musically and spiritually. And I pray that you have an awesome Sunday this week, and may God richly bless you as you lead your church in singing to Jesus.
So won't you carry me?